alleges discrimination by the USDA in the awarding of loans and other aid. We look to federal law enforcement agencies to uphold our basic civil rights, but there are charges of racism at the U.S. Marshal Service. Just 6% of deputy marshals are African-American men, and now some of them are charging discrimination. Maggie Cooper tonight begins a two-part CBS News investigation.
Hey!
Bill Scott was a highly trained federal agent with more than 20 years of exceptional service.
And now, Marshal Bill Scott.
His heroism was even dramatized on national television. But when Deputy Marshal Bill Scott won the 1991 National Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, the Chief Marshal strenuously objected.
He called me and said he had better persons that could be eligible for such an award. It was only later on that I saw that obviously race was involved.
But to Bill Scott, it came as no surprise. He says there was a pattern of racism within the U.S. Marshal Service and filed a discrimination complaint.
This is my award from the United States Marshal Service.
You received this shortly after you received the 1991 Law Enforcement Officer of the Year.
Yes.
What is it?
It's a lewd picture with male genitalia pointed at my face.
It's like a little good old boy network in the district.
Deputy Marshal Stephen Zanowic was Bill Scott's partner. Eager to help, Zanowic complained in a memo to management about racial slurs against his partner.
When the white males were together and they were sure of their company, they would speak very, very negative things, or that dumbass nigger and dumbass incompetent nigger.
But Zanowic says defending his partner made him a target of racial attacks.
This rat was given to me at a Christmas party by an upper management levels Marshal Service employee.
And when Zanowic filed a complaint charging that he was also a victim of discrimination, he says the harassment escalated.
Anyone who makes a complaint of racism in the Marshal Service becomes a target of internal affairs.
2 years ago, an administrative judge found that the U.S. Marshal Service did indeed engage in racism against Bill Scott. That's when the Justice Department stepped in, creating its own ruling, overturning the judge's decision. Bill Scott is now suing the Justice Department.
When you file an EEO complaint, that's the end for your career. It's over with. You are going against the United States Marshal Service itself.
Deputy Marshal Matthew Fogg, a 20-year veteran of the service, filed a discrimination complaint against the U.S. Marshals. He then also sued the Justice Department.
This is a culmination of everything that I've been through.
It's left deep emotional scars.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I looked at all my accolades up on the wall. It's covered with everything, you know. And here it is, I'm sitting out here and going through something like this. You know, it's okay.
Service was a big part of your life.
Yeah.
Big part of your life.
Yeah, I liked it. I really did. There was even with all of that I was going through, I liked it.
The U.S. Marshal Service has a different version of events. For months, CBS News has attempted to interview an official on camera. Finally, administrators agreed.
Is the U.S. Marshal Service racist?
Tomorrow night, the Marshal Service tells its side of the story and answers charges of racism made by the angry deputies. Paula?
Thanks, Maggie. Next up on the CBS Evening News...
6% of the deputies in the U.S. Marshals Service are African-American males. Last night, we reported the stories of 3 deputies who blamed racism for their lack of promotion and for incidents of taunting and humiliation. Tonight, in her second and final report, Maggie Cooper has more of the charges and of the Marshal Service response.
U.S. Marshals put their lives on the line every day, chasing fugitives and transporting prisoners. Bill Scott was a decorated deputy marshal, and Stephen Zanowic his partner, when they accused the U.S. Marshal Service of racial discrimination. That's when they say things really got bad.
Anyone makes a complaint of racism in the Marshal Service becomes a target of internal affairs.
Matthew Fogg, also a deputy marshal, claims his battle with racism in the Marshal Service cost him his job and his health.
I just happened to be one of those individuals that were standing up to him. And I felt I had the qualifications. I didn't want anybody to give me anything. I just simply wanted to earn what I had on my merits.
The Marshal Service will not discuss the charges by Fogg, Zanowic, and Scott, but they insist every discrimination complaint filed is taken seriously.
To say that the Marshal Service has a problem because we have complaints that have been filed is simply isn't true. If we supported every complaint that's filed, then we would assume that every allegation has merit, and then the agency wouldn't even need to defend itself.
Debbie Ridley is with the Equal Employment Opportunity Office of the U.S. Marshal Service.
Is the U.S. Marshal Service racist?
Is the organization racist? The answer would be no. Is it fair to paint us with a broad brush just because there have been discrimination complaints filed? The answer to that is no.
Even though the Marshal Service denies it's racist, Ridley admits some concerns among African American marshals are real.
Do black marshals feel that they have a problem being promoted in the Marshal Service? Yes, they do. Is it something that the leadership is unaware of? The leadership is very much aware of it.
Deputy Marshals Scott and Zanowic are suing the Justice Department and are currently awaiting trial. Last year, Matthew Fogg won his legal battle. It's the first discrimination judgment against the U.S. Marshal Service, and a jury recommended a $4 million award.
U.S. Marshal Service has always stuck their chests out and said, we've never had a finding of discrimination. Well, they have one now.
The Marshal Service says they're just like any other organization when it comes to dealing with societal problems.
Is there a good old boy network operating in this environment? The answer to that question is yes. In every federal government agency in this country, every public or private sector organization in this country, the answer to that is yes. So that means that the Marshal Service is not an anomaly.
Matt, the last time that we talked, it was very, very emotional.
Yes.
And I asked you, if you had the opportunity, would you go back? Do you remember what your answer was?
Yes. And that was, yes, I would go back. And I would go back today, because if I go back, then I can be a part of change.
But change is often slow. Matthew Fogg hasn't seen a penny of that $4 million award. That's because there's a $300,000 cap on the amount a federal employee can receive in a discrimination lawsuit. And while Scott and Zanowic continue their battle with the Justice Department, it may be years before they even get a trial date. Maggie Cooper, CBS News, New York.
Next up on the CBS Evening News, Day 2 of Pope John Paul's mission to Mexico.
And Richard Ashby was convicted last week of helping to destroy a videotape of the flight. An increasingly familiar scene was played out again today, a rally against alleged police brutality and racial profiling. CBS's Sandra Hughes reports this case is the latest in a series of incidents that has civil rights groups calling for increased action.
What do we want?
This time it's Riverside, California, where several hundred angry demonstrators were joined by national civil rights leaders protesting the decision not to prosecute 4 police officers who shot and killed a 19-year-old black woman.
We don't need permission to stand up against murder.
It was late December when the 4 Riverside policemen were called to a parking lot where Tyisha Miller lay unconscious in her car, a gun in her lap. When an officer broke out the car window, they say she grabbed for her gun, and the officers fired 23 shots at her. Family supporters charge excessive force and racism. There are reports that some officers uttered racial slurs at the scene. The Tyisha Miller shooting was the latest in a string of alleged police brutality cases, including 2 in New York, that prompted calls for action at a Congressional Black Caucus hearing today.
If we in law enforcement have to fight bigots with badges working next to us, then certainly the community doesn't stand a chance.
You are trespassing.
The 4 officers in the Riverside case aren't in the clear yet. The Justice Department is investigating whether they violated Tyisha Miller's civil rights the night they killed her. Sandra Hughes, CBS News, Los Angeles.
It was a happy scene today in K-Pac, Michigan.